Hey, what's up guys? So a lot of you probably just finished your season after quarterfinals. You're kind of thinking, okay, what's next? How do I prepare for the next year? How do I get better over the next year? Do I change up my program? What should I be training? Should I be training more aerobic stuff? Should I be training more strength stuff? So we're gonna kind of break down what you guys should be looking to do inside of your quote off season, which should be taking place after your quarterfinals, or maybe some of you guys moved on to semifinals. So there's 5 things that we want to look for: breathing patterns, aerobic base, lifting resilience, gymnastics resilience, and then skill refinement or acquisition. And there's some subcategories that we're going to talk about now for each thing. And hopefully you guys, by the end of this video, will figure out kind of what you need to do in the off season to improve for next year. A lot of the times, even at the elite level, we get into poor breathing patterns over the course of the season just because we're over breathing during our workouts. Our CO2 tolerance gets super high or super low. And so we have to work to kind of reset that in the off season. So first thing, learning how to breathe. This is literally just bringing it back to the basics, breathing from the diaphragm, making sure you're exhaling more than you're inhaling, and just kind of resetting that breathing pattern, resetting that central nervous system. The next thing is if you haven't had a lot of practice in it, or maybe you had an injury and now you're bracing pretty hard in a specific pattern, we're gonna teach you how to rebreathe in the squat, hinge, or press patterns. That is kind of nasal breathing, making sure you're moving slowly through those patterns, able to breathe the whole time. Not finding a position where you tense up and kind of hold your breath. Finally, we'll bring it into breathing in movements. So those are your deadlifts, thrusters, shoulder to overhead, handstand push-ups, and there's also some refinement that we need to work on in breathing in those. So you could even break this down further into, head on mat with the handstand push-ups. But this is kind of our first category. This applies to relatively everybody that has had a season. So this is where things start to get a little bit tricky in the off season. People are always asking, should I do more aerobic work? Should I do more strength work? A lot of it just depends on what type of athlete you are. So if you're a stronger athlete, you're actually going to want to train in the opposite realm and do a lot more aerobic base building in the off season. Whereas if you're a more aerobic and enduring athlete, you're going to want to build a little bit more strength and kind of hit some of our strength resiliency that we'll talk about here in a second. So what we're doing here is working at 120 to 155 beats per minute. This is low level aerobic base building up into kind of like that zone 2 area. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna build an intensity and volume. So as you start out, you'll start out kind of 30-ish minutes at 120 beats per minute. We can build that up to 60 minutes over the course of a kind of linear progression. And then we'll start to add in some harder heart rates to that. Maybe add some rest in, maybe make it a little bit mixed. But over the course of kind of like 8 weeks, 12-week period, this is where you're doing your aerobic base building. We'll have to play with that kind of depending on what type of athlete you are and mix in some of your other stuff also depending on your schedule. So we don't necessarily go into strength work right away just because this has been so taxed and these movement patterns have been so taxed during the season that we need to build a little bit of resilience before we move into your strength work. So, if you are somebody who needs a little bit heavier strength work or more strength work, this is what you're going to start out with for a 4 to 6 week period. And then you'll move into more of that strength work, specific progressions, building a lot more volume and capacity in your strength. What this is also going to do is going to set you up for success from injury later on down the road, getting into that January, February timeframe when open rolls around. So what we're doing here is we're refining movement patterns with load, maybe even doing some kind of rotational work inside those movement patterns. Since CrossFit uses a lot of kind of sagittal plane, up, down, moving forward to backwards, we'll throw in some rotational work there. We're gonna work on ligament and tendon strength, and we're gonna do this through tempos. And then those tempos will also help you work on positional strength. So maybe you have issues getting out of the bottom of your squat. Your sticking point is like 1 1/4 or 1/4 up the way on your squat. Maybe your deadlift pulling off the ground or 1 inch off the ground is an issue. Maybe you have a sticking point kind of on your press or your handstand push-ups 3/4 of the way up. We can work those positions with specific tempos or just doing isometric work in that position or in that sticking point, and it'll develop a lot more resilience. The other thing that this does is it allows you to get a lot more volume of strength work in down the road in the season. So maybe you are traditionally doing sets of 5. Now we can possibly up that into the 8 range, even the 10 range of some pretty heavy strength work because you've built that base for your lifting. So with this one, we're also focusing on tendon and ligament strength. A lot of this is done through isometric, strict gymnastics work, tempo on your strict gymnastics work, also some accessory movements that might be lightly loaded dumbbells, banded work, etc. Just to strengthen up your scapulas, strengthen up some of those tendons in the shoulder, labrum, and some of the rotator cuff muscles specifically. Then we'll move into some muscular endurance stuff. So these are a lot more isometric holds. You can think like chest to ring row holds, static holds over the bar, things where you're just developing a lot of time under tension. Then the last thing we'll do, so after kind of like 4 to 6 weeks, is we'll start building out that volume in those movements, which you should be able to handle after hitting a lot of gymnastics or some of these ligament strengthening and muscle endurance. So this would be somebody who has a little bit more of a gymnastics limitation in their training. We would throw this in probably on top of something like a strength work or your aerobic base work. So again, this is kind of like a 3 to 5 session week. Varies on the athlete though, and what kind of the rest of their needs are for the season. This, we're just working to refine those skills, get those movement patterns down. So this is a lot of skill work, putting those into the design, working on them, trying to figure that movement out is what you'll be doing for your skill refinement. This can be anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week, 2 to 5 times a week, even if you need a lot of skill refinement. This can also kind of help for volume building. It's not super taxing on the body, but we can throw these in to build some volume and specific patterns that you might need. So you might see something like this in the volume section of the gymnastics training and or before we hit that volume section. You can also work on lifting positions. So kind of what we talked about, if you have trouble pulling off the floor with a snatch, if you have trouble getting that snatch into the hip pocket or clean into the hip pocket, maybe you're missing some extension, this is the time to work on that. Refine that lift so that you come into the season with an even better technical knowledge and better movement patterns with it. And then the last thing is new skills. Maybe you need to learn a butterfly pull-up. Maybe you need to learn pistols. Maybe you're a semifinals athlete and needs to learn how to walk on the ramp or walk on the parallettes or reverse burpees or something like that. This also kind of works to add in a little bit more fun into your training, especially after a long season. You can be very burnt out on chest to bars, thrusters, and deadlifts. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully this gives you guys an idea of kind of what to work on for the off season. That's a very common question in CrossFit. If you guys need help, reach out to us. We'd love to be able to help you kind of set up an off season, set up a whole structure for a season. That's kind of what we do with individual coaching. So if that's something you're looking for, let us know.